I actually gave them some real advice. I said that if you actually say it louder, we've learned in the House of Commons, if you repeat it, if you say it louder, if that is your talking point, people will totally believe it, so just go it.
I actually carry my cutlery. You can now get little packages of reusable cutlery. So I have steel forks and spoons and chopsticks that I carry around. It just means I pull them out all the time. I don't need to use single-use plastic cutlery. I also carry a water bottle and a coffee mug whenever I can.
So what you're telling Canadians here, they will be asked to pay a $50 carbon tax, probably increasing over time, and there is absolutely no measurement of what the environmental effect will be.
Climate warrior Catherine McKenna spent $100,000 on her executive vehicle in just 18 months, and yet she tells me there's some sort of climate emergency. You know, I often say I would stop questioning at least the sincerity of people pushing the so-called climate scare if they actually behaved like CO2 was truly a driver of climate change, but alas, they do not. It's just an excuse to tax people to control our behavior and then scare others into extreme energy poverty.
You know more than anyone how much of a slog it was to get a carbon tax in Canada. How likely are we to get every country on board with a global carbon tax?
Well, I think the nice thing about Canada's model is the majority of Canadians get more money back. And I think that's critical because people have to be at the heart of the climate policy. And we fought very hard. Now, you may remember we had to go to the Supreme Court fighting conservative premiers, which was really unfortunate. But the good news is it held at the Supreme Court. It was well within the federal government's right to do this. And the model we adopted that was flexible, I think, was the right one. So it's a great, when I talk to countries around the world, they're very interested because, of course, you have to think about people. Of course, you have to think about costs. And we've shown, people can get more money back while still having an effective market signal.
I actually gave them some real advice. I said that if you actually say it louder, we've learned in the House of Commons, if you repeat it, if you say it louder, if that is your talking point, people will totally believe it, so just go it.
But I also like to test my theories. For example, former Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, she's recently been appointed to chair a United Nations panel on climate change. Oh, she's hit the big time. She's gotten sort of rich and kind of powerful, telling people that the CO2 emissions of their cars are responsible for the coming end of the world. So what did her car expenses look like when she was a cabinet minister? I mean, they've got to be low, right?
I actually carry my cutlery. You can now get little packages of reusable cutlery. So I have steel forks and spoons and chopsticks that I carry around. It just means I pull them out all the time. I don't need to use single-use plastic cutlery. I also carry a water bottle and a coffee mug whenever I can.
All I ever saw were images of her riding her bike to work in high heels or snowshoeing to work. She would not have been lying to us all along, would she? Just posing pictures of herself, taking the low-carbon alternative to work while actually driving her car just like the rest of us because she's just as fossil fuel addicted as I am. I just don't feel bad about it. Well, we filed for the annual amount of expenses to the government filed by the Environment Minister for their executive vehicle. Now, we're able to do this through your generous donations to a crowdfunding website, rebelinvestigates.com, where donations to that site help us cover our filing and research fees. Because we're fiercely independent, we don't get paid by Justin Trudeau to ask puffball questions nobody wants answers to anyway. Well, we got back the expenses for the Minister of Environment for their chauffeur-driven vehicle for the years 2018 through to 2021. Because not only did I want Catherine McKenna's expenses from her time as minister, but I wanted the minister after. I wanted to compare to see who was better or rather who was worse. So let's start with Minister Wilkinson, who followed McKenna. He's the new kid on the block. He was moved into the Environment Ministry in late November 2019. We don't have to look at Guilbeault because he doesn't really have any expenses and he just took office back in October 2021. So we've got about a year and a half of McKenna and about a year and a half of Wilkinson roughly to compare. For McKenna, who also alleges she drives a Toyota Prius, well, she charges us expenses for those two. But let's talk about her executive chauffeur-driven vehicle. In a year and a half, she charged the Canadian taxpayer nearly $110,000, all to be driven around. Now, of course, some of that is a driver's salary, but why does she have a driver at all? Doesn't she care about the earth?
How much will Canada's emissions, and I want a number here, how much will Canada's emissions be reduced under a $50 a ton carbon tax?
Well, thank you very much. I would like to say that a large part of the emissions that went down in Ontario is because of the coal phase out. So a shout out to the government of Ontario for taking action that improved health and also built a cleaner environment. As I said, it's important to understand that putting a price on pollution is part of our broader climate plan. We believe in numbers, so we spent a lot of time modeling. We also worked closely with provinces and territories, and with each province and territory, each province and territory is different, and they are taking, they are the ones who are implementing the system that's consistent with our benchmark. And as I say, 80% of Canadians live in a jurisdiction where there's price on pollution.
What is the number of the reduction?
And the good news is that all the jurisdictions that have a price on pollution, the 4 provinces, Alberta, BC, Ontario, and Quebec, are the fastest growing provinces in the country. So it's great to see that you can put a price on what you don't want, pollution, so you can grow your economy.
Quite clearly, the minister is simply unable to provide a number, which is clearly ridiculous. When I ran the environmental program at a paper mill, we installed a wastewater treatment plant, and we knew exactly how water quality would improve because of the installation of that plant. So what you're telling Canadians here, they will be asked to pay a $50 carbon tax, probably increasing over time, and there is absolutely no measurement of what the environmental effect will be.
Obviously not. Then we've got Minister Jonathan Wilkinson. He drives a more practical Mitsubishi Outlander, and in a year and a half on the job, he charged the Canadian taxpayer $43,500 to be driven around in an executive vehicle with an executive driver. Pretty nearly 1/3 of McKenna's expenses during the same time frame. Now, for those of you who will say, oh, Sheila, there was a pandemic and people were locked down, and so he didn't have to do in-person visits, and many of his meetings were Zoom calls. Yeah, that's the point. That is exactly the point. If the world is going to end because of the use of fossil fuels, then why aren't these people always doing Zoom calls and taking meetings virtually from home instead of being driven around the way Catherine McKenna insisted on being driven around? Because as we learned the last 2 years, you can do work that way. They got paid to do work that way, virtually. But they only dealt with the COVID emergency that way and not the climate emergency, which is the only thing they ever seem to talk about. It's almost as though they don't think the climate emergency is all that pressing, because they sure don't act like it's all that pressing. Again, I say I might take this stuff seriously once they start taking it seriously, but as you know, that's probably not true. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. This expose on Catherine McKenna's high carbon hypocrisy was only made available through your generous donations to our crowdfunding investigations website, rebelinvestigates.com. If you'd like to help us keep this work going, it's really easy. Just visit rebelinvestigates.com, make a donation today.